The night was cool, and the sound of a motorcycle echoed softly down the empty road. The bike slowed as it approached a small roadside bar, the kind of place where truckers, bikers, and locals gathered after a long day. The neon sign flickered, with half-dead lights buzzing against the silence of the countryside. Keanu Reeves, dressed in his simple riding jacket, worn jeans, and dusty boots, pulled up and parked quietly outside. He didn't look like a movie star. He didn't try to. His motorcycle was old, scratched and heavy with miles, but it carried him faithfully. He stepped off, removed his helmet, and shook his hair loose. His face was calm, carrying that same gentle expression people sometimes miss if they don't look closely. He wasn't here for attention. He wasn't here to show off. He just wanted a quiet drink and maybe a warm meal before continuing his ride. He walked slowly toward the door, shoulders relaxed, every movement simple, almost invisible. Inside the bar, laughter rang out. A pool table cracked as balls scattered, and music played low from a jukebox in the corner. The air was thick with the smell of beer, smoke, and fried food. The crowd was rough, leather jackets, heavy boots, and loud voices filling the room. Nobody noticed the door open at first. Keanu slipped in like a shadow, quiet and unhurried. Chose a stool at the far end of the counter, close to the wall where the light didn't shine too brightly. He nodded politely to the bartender who didn't recognize him. To most, he was just another rider passing through. His order was simple. "Just a glass of water first," he said softly. His voice was calm, respectful. He didn't demand anything, didn't carry the pride of a man others expected him to have. As he sat there taking slow sips, a few heads began to turn. At first, it was just curiosity. A quiet man alone often stands out in a room full of loudness. But then whispers started. One biker leaned toward another, pointing subtly with his chin. "Ain't that the guy from those action movies?" He muttered. The other squinted, then laughed. "No way, look at him, he's too plain, too soft, that can't be him." Keanu kept his eyes down, not caring to correct them, not caring to prove anything. He wasn't there to defend his name. He wasn't there to demand recognition, he was simply himself. The bikers went back to their drinks, but their glances returned again and again. Some chuckled, some smirked. They couldn't believe a man who looked so ordinary, sitting so quietly, could be the same man they'd seen fighting villains on a big screen. To them, he looked fragile, too polite, too humble, not the kind of man who belonged in a bar full of roaring laughter and heavy fists. But Keanu wasn't pretending. He didn't play tough. He didn't play famous, he just sat with patience, looking around the bar with gentle eyes. He noticed the old jukebox that barely worked, the cracks in the floor, the tired bartender cleaning glasses with slow hands. He noticed the quiet couple in the corner holding hands but saying nothing. He noticed the waitress rushing from table to table, her smile forced but her kindness still present. He noticed everything, because that's who he was. When his food came, just a simple plate of fries, he thanked the bartender warmly. His gratitude sounded real, not practiced. He ate slowly, quietly, not drawing attention. For a few minutes, the room forgot about him. But the peace wouldn't last. A burst of laughter erupted near the pool table, louder than before. A biker slammed his cue stick down and nodded toward Keanu. "Hey, doesn't he look like that actor? What's his name? Keanu something?" he called out. The others laughed. "Yeah, right, look at him. He's too skinny, too quiet. Our women could beat him in an arm wrestle." Another added, "If that's really him, where's his army of bodyguards, huh? Hollywood star sitting here all alone? Nah, he's just some drifter trying to look important." Keanu heard it all. He didn't flinch. He didn't argue. He just smiled faintly and kept eating. His calmness only made them laugh harder. They expected him to rise, to fight, to prove them wrong, but he didn't. The rest of the bar watched with curiosity. Some were amused, others uncomfortable. Some saw only a quiet man being mocked, but they didn't know yet who he really was. They didn't know that this man, sitting humbly in silence, had given up bus seats to strangers, had stopped on the street to sign autographs without complaint, had donated quietly to hospitals without ever asking for credit. They didn't know that Keanu Reeves, the man being laughed at, carried kindness and humility greater than fame itself. But in that moment, he was just a man with a plate of fries and a glass of water, sitting quietly while the laughter around him grew. The night had only begun, and nobody in that bar knew what was about to happen when the door opened again. The laughter started small, just a few chuckles from the corner of the bar, but soon it grew louder. The bikers at the pool table were already drinking heavily, their voices carrying across the room. They weren't whispering anymore. They wanted everyone to hear. One of them leaned back in his chair, pointing his pool cue toward the quiet man at the counter. "Hey, Hollywood," he shouted, "you forget your camera crew?" His friends burst out laughing, slapping the table. Their boots stomped against the wooden floor, echoing like drums. Keanu sat still, his glass of water in hand. He gave them no anger, only a small, polite smile. He didn't want trouble. He never did. But the bikers weren't interested in peace. They smelled weakness in his silence, and they wanted to test him. Another biker, bigger than the rest, stood up and swaggered toward him. His leather vest was covered in patches, his beard wild, his boots thudded against the floor with every step. He stopped a few feet away and tilted his head. "You look familiar, pal. You some kind of actor or something?" he asked loudly, pretending not to know. His friends laughed harder. Keanu's voice was soft, steady. "Just a traveler, sir," he said politely. His words only made them laugh more. "Traveler?" The man mocked. No, you look like that guy from those action flicks, the one who dodges bullets. What's his name again?" He turned to his friends, pretending to forget. They roared. "Keanu Reeves!" one shouted. The room echoed with laughter. "Yeah," the biker continued, leaning closer. "But you ain't him, you're too normal. Where's your suit? Where's your bodyguards? Where's your fancy car?" His words were sharp, dripping with mockery. Keanu lowered his eyes, still calm. He didn't defend himself. He didn't need to. But the lack of reaction only fueled them more. They wanted a fight, they wanted a scene, and he refused to give them one. The bartender frowned, wiping the counter slowly. He had seen trouble start like this before. His eyes moved between Keanu and the bikers, unsure if he should step in. The rest of the bar grew quieter, listening. The couple in the corner exchanged nervous looks. The waitress slowed her steps, holding a tray close to her chest. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. The leader of the group grinned and slammed his hand down on the counter beside Keanu's plate of fries. The glass rattled. Some fries spilled onto the bar. "What's the matter, movie star?" he sneered. "Too good to talk to us? Or too scared?" Keanu looked at him and smiled softly. "I'm not too good for anyone," he replied. His words were kind, not sharp, but the bikers twisted them into something to laugh at. "Did you hear that?" one of them shouted back at the pool table. "He says he ain't too good for us, like he's some saint or something." More laughter, louder than before. One of the younger bikers walked over and poked Keanu's shoulder with his finger, testing him. "Come on, do some of that kung fu stuff. You're supposed to be tough, right? Show us a move." His grin was wide, cruel. Keanu didn't move. He didn't raise his hand. He only shook his head gently. "I don't want to fight," he said softly. That answer brought another wave of mockery. "Don't want to fight," they repeated, mimicking his calm tone. "What kind of man comes into a biker bar and says that?" They laughed until their voices cracked, slapping each other on the back as if they'd won some great victory. But not everyone was laughing. A few men at the tables watched silently, their faces thoughtful. They recognized him now. The quiet eyes, the gentle voice. There was no mistake. It was Keanu Reeves. But he wasn't here to be a star. He wasn't here to prove his strength. He was here as himself, just a man trying to enjoy a meal. The bikers didn't see it yet. They were blinded by their own noise. Their leader leaned even closer, his shadow falling across Keanu's plate. "Tell you what, Hollywood. Why don't you buy us around? You got money, right? Big movie star like you? Pay up." Keanu looked at him for a moment, then at the others waiting behind him. Their grins were wide, their laughter cruel. Instead of arguing, instead of refusing, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded bill. He set it gently on the counter. Drinks for everyone, he said softly. The bar fell silent for a second. The bartender raised his eyebrows, surprised. The bikers looked at each other, confused. They didn't expect kindness. They expected anger. They expected resistance. Instead, Keanu gave generosity. The leader picked up the bill, looked at it, then back at Keanu. His grin faltered for a moment. His friends laughed again, but quieter this time. Some of the noise had drained out of them. It wasn't the reaction they wanted. Keanu went back to his fries, calm, unmoved. His humility disarmed the room. But the bikers weren't finished yet. Their pride was at stake, and they weren't about to let him leave without pushing harder. The mocking continued, but beneath the laughter, a shift had begun. A few in the bar started to see the difference between the loudness of the bikers and the quiet dignity of the man at the counter. They didn't know it yet. But the night was about to change, and when the door opened again, it would change forever. Keanu picked up his glass of water again, his calm presence filling the small space of the bar. The laughter from the bikers had not completely stopped, but it had softened, slightly. As he looked around, he noticed something that most people would have missed. A small girl sitting near the jukebox holding a stuffed toy tightly, her eyes wide and curious. She was watching everything, hiding behind the edge of the table, and she seemed unsure if this loud, rough place was safe. Keanu's eyes met hers for a moment, and he gave her a soft smile, gentle and kind. She blinked, and a small smile appeared on her face too. Then he turned back to the group of bikers, who were still laughing and pointing, trying to provoke him. But instead of responding with anger or words, Keanu reached slowly into his jacket pocket, pulled out a few bills and set them on the counter. He said softly, "These are for the drinks, everyone?" The leader of the bikers looked at him, expecting some trick, expecting him to flinch or refuse, but Keanu stayed calm, steady. There was no fear, no arrogance, just simple kindness. His gesture was quiet, but powerful. Of the younger bikers muttered, Why is he giving us money? Is he crazy?" The older men laughed, but there was an edge of confusion in their voices. They expected confrontation, not generosity. They expected a fight, not humility. The bartender, who had been quietly watching everything, smiled a little. He quickly poured drinks for the bikers, placing them on the counter. Each biker took a glass, their laughter now mixed with surprise. They had not expected to be treated with respect, much less kindness. Keanu did not rush. He did not push them. He simply continued to eat his fries slowly, calmly. He looked around the bar, noticing the small things others might miss. The girl by the jukebox was now standing, still holding her toy, but inching closer, watching him. A few other patrons who had been sitting quietly in the corner started to whisper among themselves. "Is that really him?" One asked. "Yeah, it's Keanu Reeves." Another said, "I thought he would act all big and famous, but he's just him." The bikers were slowly realizing that their loud words and mocking gestures had no effect. Keanu's kindness was disarming. It was soft, but strong. It was different from anything they had seen before. They had expected anger. They had expected a fight. And now they had respect instead. Though none of them admitted it yet, the youngest biker, the one who had poked Keanu earlier, frowned, uncertain what to do. He wanted to laugh. He wanted to tease. But something inside him held back. He glanced at his friends, who were also slowly quieting down. The room had shifted without anyone noticing. Then Keanu did something even more surprising. He stood up and walked over to the girl by the jukebox. His steps were slow, careful, his presence calm. She looked up at him nervously, holding her stuffed toy tightly, and he knelt down slightly to meet her eyes. "Hey there," he said softly. "What's your name?" His voice was gentle like a quiet wind, not loud enough to startle anyone. She whispered her name, barely audible, and he smiled wider. "That's a nice name. I like it," he said, making her giggle softly. The bikers and other patrons watched, silently, confused by the scene. They had come expecting drama, but instead they were seeing a man being kind to a little girl in a rough bar. The girl's parents, sitting a few tables away, watched too, their faces relaxing as they realized their daughter was safe. Keanu stayed with her for a few moments, asking gentle questions, laughing softly at her little stories. He did not rush, he did not hurry. He gave her his full attention, treating her with respect, with care. The girl's smile grew bigger, her fear fading. When he finally stood up and returned to his seat at the counter, the room was different. The bikers had stopped laughing. The other patrons were quieter. Some were even nodding subtly as if acknowledging that kindness was stronger than intimidation. The leader of the bikers scratched his head, unsure what to do. He had tried to embarrass Keanu, tried to make him angry, but nothing had worked. Instead, he felt a strange respect, a tiny seed of admiration he couldn't admit out loud. Keanu looked around the bar one last time, noticing the change, not with pride, not with arrogance, but quietly, observing how a simple act of kindness could shift the energy of a room. Everyone had seen what he had done, and they had felt it too. By the time he finished his drink, the mood had softened completely. The loud, mocking laughter had vanished, replaced by quiet conversations, soft whispers, and a subtle feeling of respect. Even the youngest biker seemed calmer, unsure what to say, unsure how to react to someone who had shown no anger, only care. Keanu left a small tip for the bartender, nodded politely, and got up, ready to leave. But the impact of his simple act of kindness had already stayed. The bar that had been filled with laughter at his expense was now filled with a sense of awe, a sense that sometimes the quiet and gentle are stronger than the loud and harsh. As he walked toward the door, the little girl waved and he waved back, smiling. That small gesture of kindness, unnoticed by many at the moment, would ripple through the bar, leaving an impression no mocking words could erase. It was a quiet victory, not of strength or fame, but of simple human kindness. The door of the bar swung open with a soft creak, and a hush seemed to fall over the room. The chatter, the laughter, and even the clinking of glasses paused for a brief moment. All eyes turned toward the entrance, curious, uncertain, a tension forming in the air. In the doorway stood a tall man, broad-shouldered, with a presence that immediately filled the room. His face was calm, his eyes sharp, scanning the bar slowly, as if he knew everything that had happened and everything that would happen. The few bikers who had been loud and confident earlier now shifted in their seats, glancing at each other nervously. Keanu noticed him first, sitting at the counter, and nodded slightly, as if to acknowledge the arrival of someone he respected deeply. There was no fear in Keanu's eyes, only calm recognition. The little girl by the jukebox clutched her toy tighter, sensing that something important was happening. Chuck Norris walked in slowly, his boots making quiet thuds against the wooden floor. His steps were deliberate, controlled, commanding without needing words. The bar's door closed behind him, and with that single motion, the energy in the room shifted completely. The leader of the bikers, who had been trying to keep his cool, suddenly felt his confidence waver. He leaned back slightly, looking at his friends for reassurance, but none of them met his eyes. They all felt the weight of the man standing at the door, though they could not explain why. Chuck's eyes scanned the bar, and when they landed on Keanu, a faint smile appeared on his lips. Not a mocking smile, not a boastful one, but a smile that carried understanding, a connection between two men who shared respect. Keanu returned the smile with a quiet nod, acknowledging the presence of someone who could change everything. Then Chuck Norris turned toward the bikers, his gaze sharp, unyielding, and for the first time, the bikers realized they were not in control anymore. They had laughed at a famous actor, mocked him, tried to intimidate him. But now, someone had arrived whose presence alone commanded attention. They had no idea what he might do, and that uncertainty made them uneasy. The youngest biker shifted nervously in his chair, his fingers fidgeting with the edge of his jacket. He glanced at the blonde leader, who simply shook his head slightly, signaling him to stay quiet. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioner and the faint creak of the ceiling fan. Chuck walked closer to the counter, his steps measured, each one carrying weight and authority. He nodded politely to the bartender, who quickly straightened up, feeling the tension but not daring to speak. Then he approached the group of bikers, stopping a few feet away, his eyes locking on their leader. "You've been loud," Chuck said, his voice deep and calm, not angry, not threatening, but enough to make the bikers pause and listen. You think this is a place for mockery? The leader swallowed, unsure whether to answer. His mouth opened, but no words came out. The bar seemed to hold its breath, everyone watching the scene. The little girl by the jukebox peeked around, sensing that something big was happening. Her parents glanced nervously at each other, unsure if they should intervene. Chuck's gaze swept across the bikers again, and a slow, quiet smile formed on his lips. It was a smile that showed power without aggression, control without violence, the kind of presence that made you realize actions had consequences, even if you could not yet see them. Then he looked at Keanu, and for a moment, the two men shared a silent understanding. Keanu's earlier act of kindness had set the stage, and now Chuck's presence was amplifying it. The bikers had no fight left in them, no reason to challenge what they could not understand. The leader of the bikers finally spoke, his voice low, uncertain. We didn't mean any harm, he said, trying to sound confident. But his words faltered. He glanced at his friends, who were all tense, their earlier bravado gone. Chuck's lips curved into a small, controlled grin. Words don't matter here, he said. Actions do. His eyes swept across the bar again, landing briefly on each patron, each person feeling the weight of his presence. The bikers. Laughter had disappeared completely, replaced by a mix of awe and fear. Then Chuck took a step back, giving the leader room to breathe, but keeping the control clearly in his hands. He nodded slightly to Keanu, signaling that everything was under control. That nod was enough to calm the little girl, who relaxed a little, and even the other patrons let out quiet sighs of relief. The bar that had once been noisy, filled with mocking laughter, was now quiet, respectful. The energy had shifted from tension to calm, from chaos to order, all because a single man had walked in, not raising his voice, not making threats, but simply existing with authority and confidence. Chuck Norris's presence was a lesson in respect and power, showing that true strength was not in making noise or mocking others, but in commanding attention with quiet confidence. Everyone in the bar felt it, from the bikers to the girl to the bartender. The lesson was clear, though unspoken. Kindness combined with strength could change everything. As Chuck finally moved toward the exit, his steps slow and measured, the room remained silent for a moment, absorbing the impact of his arrival. The bikers no longer laughed. They no longer mocked. And even their leader's posture had changed. Stiff but respectful, the bar had witnessed a quiet miracle, the kind that stayed with people long after the moment had passed. The bar was quiet now, but the tension in the air was still thick. The bikers sat in their seats, fidgeting nervously, their earlier confidence completely gone. They had laughed at Keanu Reeves, mocked him, and thought they were in control. But the arrival of Chuck Norris had changed everything. Leaving them unsure of their next move, the leader of the bikers ran a hand through his hair, trying to regain some sense of authority, but it was useless. The calm, powerful presence of Chuck had left them shaken, and even his silent nods carried more weight than any words could. Keanu sat at the counter, sipping his drink quietly, watching the bikers with a calm that only angered them more, because they knew they could not challenge him. One of the younger bikers spoke under his breath. Maybe we went too far, he muttered, glancing at the others. His voice was shaky, unsure, and it made the older bikers growl softly, trying to maintain their pride, but deep down, they knew the boy was right. They had overstepped, and now they had to face the consequences. The leader finally cleared his throat, his voice low and uncertain. Look, we didn't mean to upset anyone, he said. We thought it would be funny. His hands shook slightly, and he avoided making direct eye contact with Keanu, who remained calm and composed, the little girl watching closely from the corner. Sensing the shift in power, Chuck Norris stepped closer to the group, his boots making soft, deliberate sounds on the wooden floor. He did not raise his voice. He did not threaten, but his presence alone demanded attention. His eyes swept across, each biker reading them, understanding them, silently judging them, and the bikers felt it, a weight that pressed down on their pride and arrogance. The leader swallowed hard, trying to gather courage. We shouldn't have laughed, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. The younger bikers looked at him in surprise, realizing that their leader was admitting fault, and the room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what would happen. Next, Chuck's gaze softened slightly, not in pity but in understanding. Respect is earned, he said, his voice calm but firm. It is not demanded by yelling, mocking, or making others feel small. The bikers looked at each other, unsure what to say, but deep down, they knew he was right. The lesson was clear. Actions had consequences, and mockery could never be stronger than kindness. The leader nodded slowly, taking a deep breath. We understand, he said, his words heavy with sincerity. We won't make fun of anyone again. The younger bikers murmured their agreement, their earlier bravado replaced by a quiet humility. Even the girl by the jukebox felt safer now. Seeing that the conflict was being resolved peacefully, Keanu rose from his seat and approached the bikers slowly, his calm smile showing no anger, only quiet strength. It's okay, he said gently. We all make mistakes, but it's how we learn from them that matters. His voice was soft but carried authority, and the bikers could feel it, realizing that true power was not in intimidation but in understanding and forgiveness. The leader of the bikers bowed his head slightly, a gesture of respect, something he had never done before. Thank you, he said, his voice genuine. We understand now. Chuck Norris gave a small nod, approving the moment, and then stepped back, giving Keanu the spotlight. The bar seemed to exhale collectively, the tension easing slowly, replaced by a sense of calm and relief. The younger bikers whispered among themselves, learning from what had just happened. They realized that laughing at someone weaker or someone different did not make them strong. It only made them look foolish, and the older bikers, who had thought experience made them untouchable, now understood that true strength came from respect, humility, and courage, not from mockery. The little girl stepped forward cautiously, holding her toy, and smiled at Keanu, who smiled back warmly. She had witnessed an important lesson in courage and kindness, something that even adults in the bar had struggled to learn. The bikers, seeing her innocence and the power of her quiet observation, felt a subtle shame, realizing that even the smallest witnesses could recognize the right path. Chuck Norris finally turned to leave, his presence still filling the bar even as he walked toward the door. His silent authority lingered, reminding everyone that respect was not optional. The leader of the bikers straightened his back, his posture no longer arrogant, but cautious, respectful, and the others followed his example. Keanu watched them, for a moment, his calm presence reassuring everyone. Remember, he said quietly, it's never too late to change, to show kindness, to earn respect. The bikers nodded, quietly absorbing the lesson, realizing that they had been wrong, and that their actions had consequences beyond what they had imagined. The bar slowly returned to normal, the noise returning, but with a new energy, a new understanding. The bikers no longer laughed at others, they no longer mocked. Instead, they carried a quiet respect for the power of kindness and the presence of someone who could teach it without raising a hand. The little girl returned to her corner, feeling safe. The patrons returned to their conversations, and the lesson stayed. With everyone long after the doors had closed, the bar slowly returned to its usual rhythm. But something had changed. A quiet energy lingered in the air, as if everyone there had learned a lesson they would not forget. Chuck Norris had left, but his presence remained like a shadow that commanded respect. The bikers, once loud and brash, now sat quietly, reflecting on what had just happened, their earlier arrogance replaced by a cautious humility. The leader of the bikers rubbed his temples, still processing the events of the night. He had been so sure of his power, so confident in his intimidation, but Chuck's calm and quiet authority had shattered that illusion. The words Chuck had spoken echoed in his mind. Respect is earned, it is not demanded, and they weighed heavily on him, forcing him to rethink the way he treated others. The younger bikers glanced around nervously, unsure of what to do next. They had always looked up to the leader, following his orders without question, but now the situation felt different. They realized that blind loyalty without understanding could lead to mistakes. Even the ones who had mocked Keanu Reeves now felt a strange sense of guilt, a recognition that their behavior had been wrong. Keanu remained at the counter, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the chaos that had unfolded moments ago. He took a slow sip of his drink, observing the bikers with a quiet patience. His eyes, calm and understanding, seemed to look beyond the tough exteriors, straight into the hearts of those who had made mistakes, and in that moment, the bikers realized the power of quiet strength. The bar owner, who had been watching from behind the counter, shook his head with a smile. "I've never seen anything like this," he whispered to himself. One man walks in, and suddenly everyone changes. He had seen many fights, many arguments, but tonight had been different. There was no violence, no shouting, only a lesson in respect, courage, and kindness, and that lesson had a far greater impact than any fight ever could. The little girl, who had been watching from her corner, clutched her toy tightly, feeling safe now. She had witnessed something important, something that even adults sometimes struggled to understand. She had seen how power could be used for good, how a calm, confident presence could teach lessons far stronger than anger or fear. Her eyes sparkled with admiration for both Keanu and Chuck, understanding that true strength came from heart and mind. The bikers began to talk quietly among themselves, their voices low and thoughtful. They discussed what had happened, realizing how foolish they had been. "We should have never laughed," one of the younger bikers admitted, his voice trembling slightly. "We made him feel small, and it was wrong." The leader nodded, silently agreeing, feeling a sense of shame he had never felt before, but also a strange sense of relief, knowing he had the chance to make things right. Keanu finally stood, stretching slowly, his calm movements showing no rush. He walked to the door, glancing back one last time, his gaze meeting each biker for a brief moment. It was not a threat, it was not intimidation, but a reminder, a message that true strength and respect came from understanding and kindness, not mockery or aggression. The bikers watched him leave, feeling the weight of his presence even as the door closed behind. Chuck Norris had left a different kind of mark, one that could not be seen but could be felt deeply. The bikers understood that night that they had been taught an important lesson, not with fists, not with anger, but with quiet power, humility, and courage. They realized that one person could change the energy of a room, the attitude of a group, and even the course of events simply by being the right kind of person. The leader of the bikers took a deep breath, finally breaking the silence. "We have to change," he said, his voice stronger now, sincere and deliberate. "We can't go back to being who we were." The others nodded, understanding that this moment was a turning point. They would carry this lesson with them, a reminder that respect, kindness, and courage were far more valuable than fear or arrogance. The bar slowly returned to normal, the jukebox humming in the background, people chatting softly, but a new sense of understanding filled the room. The bikers no longer felt the need to prove themselves through mockery or loud gestures. Instead, they felt a quiet pride in learning something important, something that would stay with them for a long time. The little girl smiled again, feeling safer than ever, knowing that some people truly were heroes, not just in movies, but in real life. Chuck Norris's departure did not leave emptiness. It left inspiration, a spark of change that would influence the bikers, the patrons, and even the bar itself. The quiet lesson of the night would echo in their hearts, a reminder that courage, respect, and kindness were stronger than fear, anger, or arrogance, and that one person, acting with integrity, could make an enormous difference in the world. Even after hours had passed and the bar emptied, the story of that night would be remembered. The bikers carrying the lesson wherever they went, speaking quietly to each other about the power of calm authority and genuine kindness. Keanu Reeves and Chuck Norris had shown them that true strength was not about muscle or intimidation, but about heart, presence, and respect, and the impact of that night would last far longer than any punch or argument ever could. The night after the bar incident, the bikers rode back to their clubhouse in silence. The engines roared on the road, but inside their hearts there was no laughter, no bragging, no stories of how tough they were. Instead, There was only the weight of what they had witnessed. They had seen kindness defeat mockery, humility defeat arrogance, and calm power defeat fear. The leader of the bikers parked his bike and sat down heavily on the worn couch inside the clubhouse. His men followed, sitting quietly around him. The usual energy of loud music and rough jokes was missing, replaced by thoughtful silence. Finally, one of the younger bikers spoke, his voice low. "We can't keep living like that," he said. "What happened at the bar showed us we were wrong." The others nodded slowly, each man reflecting on his behavior. The leader, who had once been proud of his intimidating presence, now felt a sense of shame but also determination. "Chuck Norris looked at us," he said quietly, "and it felt like he saw straight through us. He didn't have to raise his voice. He didn't have to fight, and we all listened." He paused, his voice heavy with realization. "That's the kind of respect we should aim for, not fear." The bikers murmured in agreement, their heads lowering as they thought about Keanu Reeves too. They had mocked him, laughed at him, tried to humiliate him, and yet he had responded with generosity. He bought them drinks instead of insults. He smiled instead of shouting. He forgave instead of fighting. That kind of strength was something none of them had ever understood before. The youngest biker clenched his fists and spoke up again. "We always thought being loud, being feared, made us strong, but it only made us foolish. Keanu was stronger than all of us, not with fists, but with his heart, and Chuck showed us that true power is silent but unshakable." The others listened closely, nodding, feeling the truth in his words. From that night onward, the bikers made a pact among themselves. They would change, they would stop mocking strangers, stop using their numbers to intimidate others. Instead, they would try to show respect. They would learn from the lesson given to them by two men they never expected to meet. They promised to hold each other accountable, to remind one another of that night whenever pride tried to take over again. The next day, their actions began to shift. At a gas station, when they saw a nervous attendant fumbling with change, instead of mocking him, one of the bikers smiled and said, "Take your time, brother." The attendant looked up, shocked, not expecting kindness from men in leather jackets and heavy boots. The bikers rode away quietly, leaving behind surprise instead of fear. Later that week, when they entered another bar, the atmosphere was tense at first. People remembered their reputation. Everyone braced for trouble. But instead of mocking or demanding, the bikers ordered their drinks politely, tipped the bartender well, and even helped a waitress who dropped a tray of glasses. The bar fell silent in disbelief and then slowly warmed to the idea that maybe people could change. The leader of the bikers carried the lesson deeply in his heart. One evening he told his men, "Respect spreads, just like fear does. But respect lasts longer." What Chuck Norris taught us that night wasn't just about us. It was about how we treat the world. If we spread respect, we'll get it back. That's the only way to live. His men agreed, feeling the shift in themselves with each day. Keanu Reeves's kindness also became a story they could not stop talking about. They shared it with others, sometimes in whispers, sometimes in open conversations. "We met him," they would say, "and we tried to break him with our words. But he never broke. Instead, he showed us something stronger than pride. He showed us kindness." Each time they told the story, it became more powerful, not just for them, but for the people who heard it. Soon, their reputation in the town began to change. People no longer saw them only as troublemakers. Some even began to nod respectfully when the bikers passed by. It wasn't fear anymore, it was curiosity, and slowly, respect. The bikers had become living examples of how people could change, and how one night, one lesson, could shift the course of many lives. The little girl who had watched everything at the bar told her parents about it again and again. She told her friends at school too. "The man from the movies was so kind," she would say, and the tough men stopped laughing because another man came and taught them respect. Her innocent retelling carried the lesson further, spreading it to people who weren't even there. Chuck Norris and Keanu Reeves had left the bar, but their actions continued to ripple outward. The bikers carried the lesson to new places, to new people, and each time they acted with kindness instead of cruelty. The lesson grew stronger. They didn't need to shout. They didn't need to prove themselves with fists. They only needed to remember what they had witnessed, the power of humility, the strength of kindness, and the authority of respect. And so, what started as a night of mockery turned into a story of transformation. A story that the bikers themselves told, not with pride in their old ways, but with humility in their new path. They spread the lesson without even realizing how far it would go, teaching others the same truth they had learned. Real strength is not loud, it is quiet. Real respect is not demanded, it is earned. Weeks passed after that night in the bar, but the memory of what happened stayed alive in the minds of everyone who had been there. The bikers who once laughed loudly at strangers now carried themselves differently. They still rode their heavy motorcycles, they still wore their leather jackets, but their voices had softened. Their eyes carried thought, and their actions began to change. One evening, the leader of the bikers sat at the edge of the same bar where everything began. He looked around quietly, remembering the way they had mocked Keanu Reeves, remembering the way the room had gone silent when Chuck Norris walked through the door. He remembered the shame he had felt, but he also remembered the relief, the way kindness and respect had healed the tension. He had not forgotten, not for a single day. The bartender, who had seen the whole story unfold, leaned closer as he wiped the counter. "You boys are different now," he said softly. "What happened that night? It changed you." The leader nodded slowly. "Yeah," he whispered. "We saw real strength, not the kind that comes from fists, but the kind that comes from heart." The younger bikers who once cheered for mockery now listened quietly whenever the story was told. They didn't argue, they didn't laugh. Instead, they repeated the lesson with their own words. "Respect is earned," one of them would say, "and the strongest man in the room is the one who doesn't need to prove it." Their voices carried sincerity, and the people who heard them felt the truth in their words. One night, while riding through town, the bikers saw an old man on the side of the road. His car had broken down and he was struggling to push it. The old version of themselves might have laughed, maybe even circled him just for fun. But not anymore. This time they stopped, climbed off their bikes, and helped the man push his car safely to the side. The man thanked them with watery eyes, unable to believe the same men who once spread fear were now offering kindness. That moment was proof that the lesson had not been wasted. Meanwhile, the story of Keanu Reeves's calmness and Chuck Norris's presence spread far beyond the bar. People told it in whispers, retelling how a room full of rough bikers had been silenced, not by violence, but by respect. Some called it unbelievable. Some called it inspiring, but everyone who heard it felt something stir in their hearts. It became a story of transformation, a reminder that even the hardest men could change when faced with true strength. The little girl who had been holding her toy at the bar told her story again and again, to friends, to teachers, to anyone who would listen. The man didn't fight back, she would say with wide eyes. He just smiled and was kind. And then another man came in and everyone respected him. They stopped laughing. They stopped being mean. Her innocent words touched people in ways long speeches never could. The leader of the bikers began to see himself differently too. He no longer wanted to be feared, he wanted to be respected. He realized that fear faded quickly, but respect lasted. Fear made people hide, but respect made them listen. And he knew he owed that realization to the two men who had walked into his life that night, one with kindness, one with silent power. One quiet evening, as he sat outside the clubhouse, he told his men, "We used to think we were strong because people were afraid of us, but we were wrong. Real strength is when you make people feel safe, when your presence brings peace instead of fear." The bikers listened closely, their faces serious, because they knew these were not empty words. They were truths learned the hard way. Keanu Reeves and Chuck Norris never returned to that bar, but they didn't need to. Their presence was alive in every action the bikers took afterward. Their lesson had rooted itself in the hearts of men who once thrived on intimidation, and now those same men carried the message wherever they went, spreading it quietly through their changed actions. The bartender often told new customers the story when they asked why the bikers seemed so different now. One night, he would say, "They learned that kindness is stronger than pride, and respect is stronger than fear." His voice always carried a hint of wonder, because he had seen it with his own eyes the night everything changed. The final lesson was clear, and it was one that everyone in that bar carried for the rest of their lives. True power does not come from how loud you shout or how hard you hit. True power comes from how you carry yourself, how you treat others, and how you inspire respect without demanding it. That night, Keanu Reeves had shown them the strength of kindness, and Chuck Norris had shown them the weight of respect. Together, they had given the bikers something greater than fear. They had given them a new path, and so, the story lived on, not just in the memories of those who were there, but in the actions of those who were changed. The bikers spread the lesson quietly, one small act at a time, reminding the world that anyone could change, that respect could be learned, and that even the toughest hearts could be softened by kindness.